All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the June edition of Why Can't We Be Friends? This evening's topic is going to be highlighting survivors or people with experience with domestic abuse and domestic violence. GTX Connect is in partnership with Dell Medical Community Driven Initiatives, and Why Can't We Be Friends is under the umbrella of GTX Connect. My name is Kelly McGinty, and I am going to be both the moderator and I will be also answering some of the questions from the panel, as I am also a survivor of domestic abuse. I want to draw everyone's attention to the chat box where Chuck is going to go ahead and he is going to post the Slido application. And he just did that. If you look in there, there's an HTTPS tinyurl.com link. You click on that link, that will pop you over to our Slido, and that is where you can see questions that have been asked. You can either submit your own question, or you can vote for some of the questions that have already been asked. When you vote for the questions, it will automatically pop those questions up toward the top, making them more of a priority to be asked to the panelists. So go ahead and take a second to click on that link. If you have any questions about that, you can put it into the chat, and Chuck will do his best to help anyone who may be struggling with the Slido application. And with that, we will get started with our introductions from our lovely panelists this evening. Carol, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. I wasn't sure if I was just supposed to jump in. Hi,
right.
everybody. My name is Carol Fouts, and I recently wrote a book, and it was published in March called Finally Free. So I get to claim that I'm an author. And I have a couple experiences with domestic abuse and domestic violence. And so I was kind of excited to get to be on a panel and kind of see what you guys are interested in learning more about, kind of where you're at, and what are these questions that you're possibly going to ask. Thanks for letting me be here.
Thanks, Carol.
Hi, my name is Chrissy T, and I have experiences with domestic abuse and violence, and I'm just glad to be here and answer whatever questions I can for you.
Okay, great. So I will remind everyone again to go ahead and check out that Slido application and vote for the questions you think that you want to hear for sure answered. And I will go back and forth between the Zoom room and the Slido application so that I can ask some of these questions. And I'm going to pop in there now and see what's going on. As of right now, we have 11 questions.
Wow.
We will see if we can get through all of them. These are great questions. Yeah, so just go ahead and go in there, vote for the questions you want asked. And with that, I am going to get started. I'm going to ask the first question. And it is from anonymous. They're all anonymous. I don't know why I'm saying that. It's from anonymous, which they all are. So the first question is there any way to identify a potential abuser so that you don't get involved with them in the first place? So that is the first question. And that is an interesting question.
Yeah, oh man, I wish I knew if this was all women or all men, then I could answer that.
Right. It's a mixed group. So yeah. So
Yeah,
I,
do we just start answering or do you
yeah,
pick us,
we
or?
usually like take turns. You go
Okay.
ahead and go.
So I was thinking, I think the signs are communication and how they communicate with you in the beginning. If your red flag goes up and it's only up just a little bit and you start making excuses, that's probably time to actually go. Just listen to your intuition. And if something's not comfortable, keep moving.
Right. So identifying a potential abuser. So I'm just going to give people a little background. So I have a master's degree in counseling psychology, and my primary work when I first came into this field was at the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center in San Marcos, Texas. So I actually worked in a domestic violence women's center. I took the middle of the night phone calls from people who would call. I did some counseling with individuals and families, but primarily my job was actually violence prevention. I did violence prevention education. So in terms of identifying potential abusers, I liked what Carol said about the red flag thing, and if you're making excuses for them, because I think that that's really important for people to note, is that, there are some textbook things that people who have power and control issues do that are identifiable. And some of those include things like isolating the person from friends or family. If this person doesn't want you to have your own interests, doesn't want you to go hang out with your girlfriends, is always wondering who you're on the phone with, things like that. So isolating people is definitely a red flag. Somebody who's hypercritical of people can be a red flag, and potentially, seeing something like that. Really, it comes down to control. Somebody who has really big control issues is potentially throwing up a lot of warning signs for people. But I would also like to add to that even if you know all of the red flags, and even if you worked in a domestic violence center for the beginning of your career as a counselor, there is no protection or immunity from being a survivor of abuse or violence, because I had all of those things under my belt. I taught violence prevention to middle school, high school, and college aged folks, and did some family stuff with that as well. And I still went on to become a survivor of domestic violence. So knowing and understanding those red flags are great, but they can't always protect us from what's coming down the line. And there's more, there's probably other questions that will reveal more of that. So I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And then I'm going to let Chrissy give this one a shot.
So I love the red flags thing because that's so true. But if you're in the midst of a new relationship, you're kind of blinded, especially if you just really want a relationship, or if you've liked the person for a while and then getting into a relationship with them. And I know, like Kelly mentioned, some of my biggest red flags were the isolating me away from friends and family. Like I had hardly any of my friends when I met, and when I met this person, and then he decided to move me away from my family, and since we were married, and and our wedding, like we didn't have any friends or family there, just, well, there was like a couple people, but it wasn't like a big wedding or anything like that. And it's kind of like, just let's hurry up and get this done. And then and after, especially after we got married, that was kind of like all of a sudden he changed. And I mean, the signs were there. It's just, I didn't stand up for myself. I felt like he had all the control, and also that just those flags weren't like, I couldn't see them until much later. And then also usually, and I have found this a lot of the time, usually there's other like substance problems with people who are in domestic violence, and then they're afraid to speak up too. Also, listening to your friends, your close friends, if they're telling you something is wrong and that you just can't see it, and it's repeated over and over and over again, start kind of taking a look at the situation and who you're with.
That was great. Okay, so I'm gonna pop over here and see what the next question up is. So the second question that was voted on is, if you reported it, how did the police or the entity that you report it to respond? So if you reported it. So Carol, was there something reportable?
I had no idea that it was actually something to report. So I can't say. I didn't realize that I was even in these situations until I wrote my book, and I was like, oh, that was kind of like domestic violence-y. And so no reporting here.
So we were talking about this briefly before we came in, and that there is a huge misconception that the only kind of domestic violence is kind of this, stereotypical picture of a battered woman who has been battered and abused over and over again, who's got, who's black and blue all the time for years and years and years, or, gets put in the hospital. And that is not the only kind of domestic violence. Now, those are extreme cases of domestic violence, but domestic violence and domestic abuse can be a lot more than just that. And I think that the majority of the women who experience domestic abuse probably experience more of the nuanced abuse. That's not necessarily that they slammed you up against a wall or, choked you until you passed out. Like, that's not necessarily what's going on in a lot of these abusive situations, but it still very much is domestic abuse, and it still very much does take a psychological toll on the people who survive it.
So to go to the question,
mhm.
did you report?
I did report.
Okay.
So I called the police the very moment that my actual physical attack happened to me. And my abuser was arrested that night. This was in Austin, and the law enforcement people who came were very attentive to me, very concerned about the situation. They did all of the things that they're supposed to do. They, put in the emergency protective order, all of that. They took him to jail, all of those things. So I did report it. And it was, and I did feel like that the people who responded to my particular situation were attentive. Other places you can report domestic violence are even things like telling CPS, telling a counselor, anything like that. So it's not necessarily just reporting it to the police. It could be reporting it to anybody, a friend, a family, a parent, an agency. So how about you, Chrissy?
So the mental abuse that started everything with my abuser. And luckily, I can only recall one abuser, but all of the mental stuff that happened with my abuser caused me to have severe PTSD and start to manage that by self-medicating and things like that, because I didn't want to tell anybody, because I thought I could change them, and I thought that they would change into my idea of of something, and if I called the police on him, that he would just hate me and he would never want me back, or I was just scared of the repercussions afterwards. And there was a couple of times that there was physical activity, and the police did not get called because we were just scared of what might happen after the police left, or if he didn't get arrested, and then also my brain was so changed and altered by the verbal abuse that I thought the physical abuse was okay. You know, I didn't want to have my kids taken away, and I didn't want things like that to happen. And until I finally just stood up for myself. But yeah, and also after I had gotten away from this marriage, I tried to go get a protective order for my daughter, and they said that there was no evidence of needing a protective order. So I felt kind of discouraged and disappointed that I felt like they weren't able to help me the way that they should have, or what have you. And so that also caused some other issues just mentally. And I mean, it's just like trusting police officers and stuff, and it's really hard to prove verbal abuse. And physical abuse is hard if there's no bruises or scratches or anything like that also. So I just, half the time I would call and half the time I didn't. And then and I mean, nothing ever seemed to get resolved until much later with him. So yeah, I mean, that's all I have for that.
The word verbal abuse is always tricky, because really what we're talking about is psychological abuse.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like verbal abuse isn't just being yelled at or, you know, called names or something like that. It can be a lot more insidious than what people realize. So, all right. I'm just going to remind everyone again that if you want to check out some of the questions that have been asked and vote on them, you can do that throughout the entire conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and come back into Slido. Oh, this is the one this is the one people always talk about. So, why didn't you leave? Is the question. Why didn't you leave?
I left. My experience, it was kind of like two experiences in a short period of time. And we were I wanted to go to the beach with my friends. And I knew that when he got back from the float he was on, because we were in the military, he wouldn't want to go. So I thought I would just leave him a note, said, hey, come play volleyball and eat some hot dogs down at the beach. Next thing I know, I'm sitting in a circle and I see the people across from me and their eyes got all big, and he's a big guy. And I just feel myself getting lifted off the ground by the back of my sweatshirt. And I was so embarrassed. And, you know, he said, let's go. And I just sat back down, of course, because I'm as tough as he is. And then a little bit later, a friend of mine died, and he actually had a pistol waiting for me when I came home because I was crying about this person dying and at my face. And I just said, do it. And, you know, because when you're fearful, you know, it's fight or flight, and I'm going to fight. That's just what my nature was. This was in my 20s, so I didn't know any better. And so I got out, and because I was like, this doesn't feel right. And I had no idea it was domestic violence. I figured since I'm a mouthy person and I probably instigated it, you know, that whole, oh, it was my fault. It's not. And, you know, I don't know that there was a name to put on it back then, or I just wasn't aware. And I too am a counselor, and you know, it's easy to say what to look for when you're my age because I've already seen it. So just keep yourself safe and definitely leave. Yeah. And leave safely, as safe as you can.
So I also left eventually. But it's not, it again, these things are complicated. And Chrissy kind of touched on this earlier, and that is, when you are in a situation like that, your brain does change. The
Mhm.
trauma changes your brain, but also the things that you are being told about yourself that the person is using to convince you that you're weak, or that you're not capable, or that you're not able to whatever, whether it's telling you you're stupid, or whether it's telling you that you don't love that person enough or care about them enough, or something along those lines. So and it's also a question of history. The person I was with, we were together off and on. He was my first boyfriend when I was like 13 years old, and we kind of dated off and on throughout our entire lives. And sitting here now, I can look back at some of his behaviors and clearly see that it was manipulative and controlling. But at the time, I truly believed that it was some sort of like level of immaturity, right? Oh, they're just immature because we're all young and don't know what we're doing, or don't know whatever. And you do love and care about this person. That's what I think a lot of people have a difficult time understanding, is that, you know, that love doesn't necessarily evaporate or go away. And we do kind of play these mental mind games with ourselves of thinking this person is redeemable, this person is changeable. We try to change ourselves. If I do everything like this, and this, well, then all of these things are going to be better. If I could be a better partner, a better mom, a better listener, more understanding about this, that, or the other, then this relationship is going to be okay. And we have a child together, and we need to work through this so we can, give this kid some sort of existence, right? So, I mean, ultimately, I did leave, and I am really grateful that I was able to do that. But it's not an easy thing to do, and it can be incredibly complicated and layered, and not just kind of a cut and dry thing. And there's a reason why they talk about a cycle of abuse, right? And the first part of the cycle is that honeymoon phase. So in the honeymoon phase, everything is amazing. Everything is fantastic, perfect, wonderful. You're amazing, right? You're the most beautiful, fantastic, smart, intelligent person that they're so lucky, all of these things. But that's the honeymoon phase. And there's a euphoria kind of associated with that honeymoon phase. It's not real. It's kind of predicated on this idealized version of the most fantastic relationship in the world, right? And somehow you guys are special, or soulmates, or whatever other things that people want to use as a tool of manipulation. And so when the cycle kind of keeps going, you miss that honeymoon phase. I mean, you'll almost do anything to get back to that honeymoon phase, right? And so that's why it kind of cycles through over and over and over again. And it is not a cut and dry situation.
Yeah, so I eventually left as well. I was able to, the first time it became physical with me and him, I called the police and I was able to leave. Because I was just, I was so scared, but there was also like other people in the house with us. So I was just ready, I guess, at that point. But that, even though I left the home, about, I would say like a year or two later, I mean, we were still talking because we were still married. We were just separated. And he was still very abusive. Even just while we were separated, trying to get, but I just wanted it to work so bad because I had a child with him and I could not see, because he always said, oh, that I'll never do that again. That won't ever happen again. I won't ever talk to you like that again. And then as soon as I like let my guard down, it's good for a little while, and then it cycles into the abuse again. And it was verbal abuse after that, because I never lived with him again after that first time that he was physical with me. And I had seen him be physical with his own mom, friends, and things like that. And it was just not a red flag for me, because I thought, oh, that's them, and I'm doing everything right, so he's not going to get mad at me. I'm doing what I can. I'm being the mother and the wife, and I'm not seeing anybody he doesn't want me to see, and I'm not going anywhere he doesn't want me to go. And then once that changed, he was just so abusive, like just over the phone and text messages. And then I wouldn't hear from him for a while, and then he's changed. And so with it, I feel like it starts with verbal abuse, and then by them just getting you secluded and making you feel like you're not worthy, you're not good enough, that you're unintelligent, that you won't make it without them, that you won't have any friends if you're not with them, you won't have a life without them, or they'll come after you. I heard that a couple of times. I mean, that was all pretty scary stuff. And so I just started, my brain did start changing, and it's kind of like brainwashing, like starting to think that. And every time I would start to think that I was good enough, or I could do it on my own, he would start being nice again, to try to get me back into that, like, oh, I'm not that person. I was just a little intoxicated, or, oh, I was just having a bad day, and that's not me. And that wasn't true. So yes, I finally did leave, and I know there's a bunch of other outlets for women who are in situations like that they can safely leave, as long as I don't know, you just have to be really careful about it if it starts to where it's too bad. And some organizations do know how to help you cope and get away from the situation. Luckily, I didn't have to do that. I finally just stood up for myself, and I mean, and that was it, I guess. And then I got away. I was just so happy I got away. And when your friends start telling you, like, oh, thank goodness you're gone, you left, like, now you're a completely different person, you weren't acting yourself. um Whenever your friends start telling you that, that there's a problem.
So I'm going to see what we're looking at over here. So it looks like more people are voting on some of the questions. And here is the next one, which is, did you experience domestic abuse or violence, witness anything like that in your childhood that you think might have been a factor in becoming a survivor? So I'm wondering, so for Carol, I'm wondering, was there, I mean, and I have no idea, was there something that you saw or witnessed in your childhood that maybe gave you that inclination to get out right away. Because when you talk about your situation, it sounds to me like it could have gotten a whole lot worse if you
Yeah.
hadn't removed yourself when you did.
You
'Cause
know, it's
that's
interesting that you kind of ask it like that, because I reflect back, I had a stepdad that my mom married when I was 9. And then you have that, hashtag Me Too movement. And I was like, well, that never happened to me. Oh man, that did happen to me, and so you think about that situation, and when that 5-second event happened to me from the stepdad, I literally got up, put myself against the wall, and I knew that was not a good situation, and I left. And then through the, having alcoholic parents, I remember one time we're driving into my El Camino, and because that's what I did, is when I got my license, I got to go pick up my drunk parents. And my mom threw the car into park and just started going off about the stepdad. And so obviously she's getting some abuse toward her. And so, I got out of that house as soon as I turned 18, and then get into that marriage where you're getting lifted off the beach. So yes. And then in the relationships, I make sure that I'm the one that leaves first. And if you get too close, I'm going to pick you, I'm going to have sex with you, and then you're going to go. Don't call me, I'll call you. So I became very hard, and unwilling to let people get really close. And I was going to make sure that I was always in control, knew where I was at, which is a false thing that you think you have control of.
right.
Because all you do is, you get to mature, and then I write a book, and then you're reading this book, and it's like, how did you not know that this was the life that you were existing in? And on the outside, you were so happy, but you had these like really hard, not so fun things happen to you, And so I think that that's the thing with me, is I just, I had to work through, and in recovery, this is when this mostly comes, really the work is done, and that softness can come back, and you don't have to have that fear that somebody's going to hurt you in any way. And it's really just working with people that have the same goal to be healthy, in all aspects, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally, and that's why this is such a broad topic. It's not just a punch in the face, and yeah, so broad, I can't remember what you actually asked me, but I hope that helps somebody.
Well, you did answer the question, because it was
Okay.
specifically related to kind of childhood experiences and maybe how that, impacted the way things went the rest of the way. I know for me, I did witness some issues like that in my childhood. They were pretty extreme, I think, too. I think that that's why, as I got older and became an adult, I wanted to work in counseling and kind of in the domestic violence field. But with that said, I got that master's degree, that was, I was in my 30s.
Mhm.
So, and up until then, I hadn't dated someone or been in a relationship with someone who had been abusive like that toward me, right? So, I didn't have a long string of abusive instances with,
Mhm.
intimate partners. Um, I definitely think that I saw some of this. I think I could have. I think that I definitely dated a few guys that I kind of did what Carol did. And I was like, oh no, this doesn't feel right away. But I think with the person that I ended up with, which, my abuser, I think I had a blind spot for him because he was my first boyfriend, right? So I had this long history, and he had never previously been abusive in that way. Maybe some control issues, maybe some immaturity issues, but did I ever think in a million years it was going to be turn into an abusive situation? Absolutely not. So, that is another really complicated question. But I do think that that there are a lot of women who come out of households that have domestic violence, or adult children of alcoholics, or, you know, whatever the case may be, growing up in a household with single parents, whether it's a single father or a single mother. You know, I do think that there are a lot of what I would call risk factors, I guess, when you start looking at this. But you know, I can't really say definitively that I feel like because of this, that's why eventually this happened, right? But, you know, so far Carol said that, you know, she's an adult child of 2 alcoholics, and there was some abuse history, and I'm kind of saying the same thing, and now I'm curious to see what Chrissy says.
I'm actually going to follow suit. So my father is an alcoholic, and he was very abusive to my mom verbally. And I was always taught growing up, like, when you get married, you stick with that person. My parents did. And that was just what I was taught. So you just work through it, or be abused or whatever. And even when I was younger, my dad and some of his drinking career, I guess you say, he he would like physically abuse us, and then not all the time. I mean, it was like sporadic, and it's usually whenever he was very drunk. And like, I remember getting pushed across the kitchen when I didn't fill ice trays or do chores or something like that. And so I just kind of got brought up. I also saw my brother black and blue with a switch from the yard. And I mean, there's spanking, and then there's abuse, and he was definitely abused. And so seeing things like that, I don't know if it is a direct cause of why I ended up marrying the person I ended up marrying, but I do know that that did help the situation of not being able to leave. Because I just thought that, you know, that's how it's supposed to be. You know, that's how I grew up. And it wasn't like it was that bad, or, you know, this horrible childhood or anything. It was just these isolated cases. And that's basically who I married. It was like my father. And I know a lot of people say that, but that's basically who I married. And so, and my mom had never left him. And so leaving, when I did finally leave, it was just like, I've almost felt like taboo or something, even in this day and age, you know, like that it was not going to be okay. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that has a direct correlation to your childhood traumas, but I do think it kind of puts some blinders on a little bit with thinking that it's okay.
The normalization of it. So just to piggyback on that a little bit, because Chrissy and I are pretty close friends, and we've had these conversations before because we both have daughters. And I feel like we really too try to go out of our ways to role model for them that it's okay, you know, where Chrissy was talking about her family role modeling. Oh no, you put up with this. This is normal. This is the way it is, right? You stick it out. You know, we're doing the opposite of that. We're now trying to role model. Actually, it's okay if you have boundaries, and if you say something's not right, and if you say no, or if you expect people to treat you a certain way, you know, all of those things, you know, trying to normalize being independent and kind of having a voice and not having to, you know, just take whatever. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Carol.
Oh no, I already answered with mine. I'm good. I just, the only thing I say no, and then I'm going to talk anyway, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
It was interesting that Chrissy said, you know, it's normal. And then you have another perspective of, I just go, you know, and that's normal to me to just run from those situations. And I was thinking about, well, what does our audience look like? You know, are there people in here that have been on the other side where they are the ones that are the aggressor? and who's actually listening, and to kind of focus in too on giving a little bit of solution in this of communication, and just keeping those communications open, and talk about what's going on with somebody that is in a professional type field, because friends are great, yes, for warning signs, but when something's not right, you got to go and talk to somebody that has the skills to guide you safely, whichever direction, whatever side of it, if you're the abuser, if you're the one that's being abused. I just want to throw that out.
Great. So I am back over here in the Slido application. So there's a couple of questions on here that seem to be similar. So I'm going to kind of link them together. Let's see, how can I word these together? Okay. I'm just going to read both of them back to back, and we can kind of take from them what we want. So they're somewhat similar and a little different. So one of them is, do you recognize abuse of women against men? Are you familiar with any of these situations? And do you have any thoughts on men who are survivors of domestic violence? So I have thoughts, but I will go after somebody else.
Okay. For the first part, I would say, Christy, did you want to go first? Okay. For the first part, I would definitely, that was about women being abusive to men, right? That's
Right.
what that question was.
Or male,
Okay.
or
Yes, we are very abusive to men, and we do it very methodically, because when we do this, for me, I'll just speak for me, this is how we show our control, and it hides our fear, and it gives us some power. And the way that we do it is to hide the jealousy that's happening, and we'll redirect it at another time. We keep score. So anything that you do wrong, we'll hang on to that for a while, and then we'll get ourselves all wound up, and then we'll just come at you like those guns that shoot you quick fire, I think, or something. And that's one way that I feel that women can be abusive. We can also ignore and not support you, which can make men feel very lonely, and that's not our fault. As far as how somebody else feels, again, everybody's responsible for how they react to their own situation. So that's kind of tricky. I just want to admit that I can be really mean sometimes. And I definitely, as I've gotten older and can recognize those things, I definitely try to treat all people equally. And the second part was, what was it about men being abused and any experience with them being abused?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have personal experience with that, so I'm not going to interject on that.
Okay. So, in terms of males who are victims of domestic violence, I know in my 4 years at the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center, there were about, and we had an actual shelter there, right? So this was and it's called the Women's Center, right? But it really was for anybody who was a victim of domestic violence or who was in a dangerous situation. So we did have a handful of times where there would be males, and we would have to house them in a hotel, basically, because we couldn't just throw them in with the other women, in the shelter. The majority, okay, no, all of the males that came to the shelter in that situation were being abused by other males. So they were same-sex couples. But when you're talking about the shelter level, when you're talking about people reaching out to a domestic violence entity, we're talking some pretty significant levels of violence or abuse, right? So I think that's kind of the reason why it goes like that. Now, in terms, do I believe that women can perpetrate domestic violence on men. As Carol was kind of saying, you know, I do believe that women can be abusive, and even, you know, dangerous. That they can, I mean, I watch too many true crime podcasts of these women who poison their husbands to, like, you know, pretend that that's not a thing. But in terms of, you know, a typical domestic violence situation, statistically, women are going to be primarily the victims. And when victimized, they're primarily going to be in the most danger. And that typically has to do mostly with just, you know, size, aggression levels, you know, strength, physicality, stuff like that. So, do I believe that there are male victims of domestic violence? Absolutely. I believe that in the most severe cases, most of the time they're being abused by other men. And I think that in the cases that we're talking about where women are the aggressors, we're talking about kind of an even more marginalized population than the already marginalized population of female survivors of domestic violence, right? So, I think that it's definitely something that happens. People definitely don't talk about it as much. But I'd also like to note that men are probably a lot less likely to report domestic violence from a female partner because of just kind of our stereotypical gender patriarchal roles and situations, that they're, you know, they don't want to, they're ashamed to say that they're being abused by, you know, by their female partner. So yeah, that whole topic is it's fascinating to me, and I think it's probably something that we really don't know a whole lot about. I think that it's something that we could definitely use a lot more information on. Chrissy?
Yeah, I have something to say about this. So, okay, can you repeat the questions though? Repeat.
I can see if they're still on there. Sometimes Chuck takes them down, but
Okay.
one of them was something along the lines of like, what do you think about men who are abused by women? And the other one was it just said male victims of domestic violence, and that I
Okay.
kind of differentiated the two, because one
Okay.
specifically was just males who are victims, and the other one was specifically women who are perpetrators. Does that make sense?
Mhm. So, like Carol was saying, I can be, and this isn't like, it's just as bad. So I can be mean sometimes too. And the older I get, and the more experienced I get away from abuse and learn about myself, the kinder I am and the kinder I become to everyone. And but I can do some of those things that she was talking about as well. So, and they are considered abusive. So, I mean, there's some of the mental abuse. And my current boyfriend, we've been together for 5 years, and not one of us have had to ever call the police or ever been able to feel like we're down on each other or any of that. And it's a good relationship that I am so thankful that we can communicate and talk and we don't put each other down. And if it gets to that, we just confront each other openly and open-mindedly about it. And so I do know men who are abused by women and they do not report it because they feel like that they're less than, like that they're not a man if they report it, or if they do report it, that the police might look at them because the woman is lying or whatever, you know, and then they'll go to jail, the men will, instead of the women. And like a case, so I have a sibling, and this lady, his ex, he has children with her, and she like comes after him physically. There have been multiple reports about with police officers, and she's taken bats to cars and like come after him with weapons, and she's left scars on him, and that he fights back. So when he's fighting back, she looks at it as attacking, and sometimes the police do too, because they're also under the influence or something to that effect. And I just think if you like that, it's not, there's a stigma with men being abused, that they don't know maybe to look for help, or know who to ask or where to go. And I mean, like, I know men that were sexually abused also, and by women, and it's just and then like also a time ago, there's a really good friend of mine that I don't even know why he would be my friend, because I would talk bad about him to his face all the time, and just really be just mean to him. And I'm not that person anymore, especially since I've had it come back toward me, and I can kind of grow and see that, like, how I'm treating others. And it's really hard with men, and it's sometimes like it's like and it's hard to tell them like you are being abused, because they just don't want to believe it. They don't think that that's a role that they can have, as like being abused. So yeah, I mean, I'm not a man, so I don't really know like the thoughts and how they think, but I do know that I can control myself. And since I've grown, and I sought counseling after my abuser, and then when I sought counseling, I saw myself also and doing some of the things that my abuser was doing to me. So I was like blown away by that. So yeah, speak up, because it's not, if you're a man and you are being abused, speak up to somebody. You can talk to a counselor or an officer or something, like just alone, one-on-one too, if you feel like there's a stigma against it.
I was just thinking of a scenario that I hadn't thought of for a long time. That's why I think participating in these panels and these kind of groups can really help you like find little seeds that you haven't quite picked out yet to toss. And I was with this guy, and he made me mad because he was late to something. And of course we were intoxicated, because that always helps people be real calm. And he wanted to stay, and I was ready to go. And so I pushed him in his chest, and he's like 6 something, and he pushed me in my chest back, but I was little. So I flew across behind the car and cracked my head open. So he swoops me up, takes me to the hospital. And in the room, they had him wait outside, and they were, do you need us to call somebody? And I was just like, no, I'm not going on Ricky Lake as some abused person. I'm the one that started this, and we just have to be really cautious and aware of how we're feeling in situations, and stop putting it on other people and dealing with our own stuff. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
Okay, so I am back in Slido. We are getting pretty close to 8 o'clock, so we will probably ask 1 or 2 more questions. I'm trying to see what other ones have been voted on. Blah, 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 blah. We've asked those. Let's see. This is a newer question that was asked by one of the people in the viewing room. It says, there have been cases of individuals convicted and put in prison for abuse that have been reversed after additional review. What are your thoughts about this? And I'm going to go first on this one. So So I called the police right away when my abuse was happening, and I was able to get my protective order. And, those protective orders, I'm not sure if anybody follows, the news in Austin much, but even up until recently, there was a woman who had a protective order, and I believe her ex was in law enforcement. And with her protective order in place, he showed up to her home and he killed her, and he killed her daughter, and he killed her daughter's boyfriend. This was in the last year or so in Austin. Protective orders don't really protect anybody. But what they do is if you have a protective order in place and the person violates it but doesn't murder you, you are able to maybe have a better chance of getting them put into prison or have to serve some time. So I know that for my person, they ended up doing about 2 years in prison, but I had to have extensive evidence. You cannot just say, oh, well, this person came to my house. If you don't have a Ring doorbell camera that can record images or pictures on your cell phone that you snapped when they showed up at your house, or text messages specifically saying, hey, I'm heading to your house, like outright saying it. If you don't have that kind of evidence, there's nothing that's going to happen. A lot of times in such like these kinds of cases are extremely difficult to prosecute unless you have severe physical injuries that are documented by the medical community, right? So if people have been convicted and they've been wrongfully convicted, I'm glad that their cases are being reviewed and that they're being released. I don't think anyone should ever be wrongly convicted on any offense, right? But the majority of the time, the reverse is true. It's a lot more difficult to convict somebody and actually have them serve any significant amount of time. The majority of these people get probation, especially if they don't have any other kind of prior history on their record. They get probation, they get these protective orders. If they violate the protective orders, then they get in more trouble, but you have to be able to prove that they violated the protective orders. Chrissy wasn't even able to get a protective order. I had my ex on protective orders for, I think, something like 6 or 7 years. And then the last one had lapsed, and I let it lapse intentionally. And, about a year and a half later, I was like, that was really stupid. And I feel like I need it back. And when I went in to try to get my protective order reinstated, no matter what I said, they really weren't going to do anything or help. If I had requested that it had been extended, that would have been easier. They probably would have agreed to that. But because I let it lapse, they weren't really, without any new assaults or new, like, very damning evidence, they weren't willing to reinstate that level of protection. And so, there's a lot to be desired with the protective order system, with the amount of time that people necessarily get put in prison and released or are on probation. And so that's kind of what I wanted to say about that question. Does anybody have anything else they want to add about the people who are convicted and then it said, but later their case is reviewed and it ends up being dismissed? And what do we think about that?
This is definitely one of those prevention, so you don't end up in the system. It's so confusing to me. One person gets 3 days, another person gets 3 years, and it's the same offense. If it was really simple, it would be across the board, state to state. The fact that states have different laws for the same crime, there's no way for us to catch up. There's no way for us to know. It's like rolling the dice at a casino. The only way to make it work is to not get in their system. And the only way to do that is to take care of yourself, look at the red flags. If it doesn't feel right, you got to walk away. And that's the only way, because once you're in the system, we just don't know. We don't know if the judge is happy that day. We don't know if the judge is not happy that day. And so prevention, prevention, prevention.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this. So, if they were wrongfully convicted, which Kelly had already mentioned, it's really hard to convict somebody without some sort of evidence. And so, again, my ex-abuser, my ex-husband, he was in another relationship and or a couple of relationships, and I found out that he was in jail he was waiting trial, and it was during COVID and stuff, and they had evidence, but he went about a year in, and the girls decided to not press any further charges, and he had served a year. They reviewed his case, and he's just on probation or what have you now, and he got out. So he wasn't, I mean, and they had evidence and everything. It was just that the women decided that they didn't want anything to do with him or the case or anything anymore, and so it kind of just got overturned. And now luckily one of the girls he was with left as soon as he got out, because she was like, I'm not going to do this, and hasn't talked to him since. So glad for that. But as far as, it's really hard to get convicted of something that I don't know. My thoughts on it, if anybody is wrongfully convicted, it's just wrong, and I feel sad for that situation, and they should be, it should be something that's talked about. But like Carol was saying, with our legal system, it's just so out of whack, and we don't know what could happen, or what the sentence could be, or what the repercussions of certain violent things, or what is considered violent enough or not violent enough, like the mental and abuse. If you just go to someone with a bunch of mental abuse statements, I mean, you're not going to get a protective order for that. So it's really a fine line of, and a protective order is just a piece of paper. It's not going to stop anybody from doing anything if they really want to. So yeah, I mean, all the wrongfully convicted people, domestic violence or not, I mean, that is wrong. I just pray for those people. I mean, there's wrongfully convicted people all the time, not just for domestic violence. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know how the system works with that either. So that's pretty much all I can say on that.
All right, we're a little over, but I'm gonna ask one last question, and then we're gonna wrap it up. So the final question there's a lot of good questions. It's hard. The final question for this evening is, how has your leaving your partner affected the relationship with your kids and their father? And how did they react to your wanting to leave? I know that's a hard one. Yeah. I'm not going first on that one.
Yeah, I'll go first. I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, so at first, so my son is not, my ex-husband is not the father of my son, but I had a daughter with him. And at first my daughter was upset because we hid those things from her. And then a bunch of other stuff came to fruition, and she actually had to live with him for a while, and she could see it. So she could see all of this violence and stuff happening and going on. So whenever she came back home to be, now she just doesn't really want anything to do with her father because of all of the abuse. And this right now might actually be the most she's ever heard about it. I'm not really sure. But my son, on the other hand, he witnessed it and he was ecstatic when we left. I mean, he was very happy that we had gotten out of that situation because I don't know, he's like a voice of reason for me. And just like the look on his face, it was just uh like I could just breathe again, and he could breathe, and he just seemed much happier. And I mean, to this day, and we have been divorced for, I don't know, some years now, like 5 years or so, 6 years now, 5 years, I don't know. Anyway, he has just been, on a whole different level of, at ease, I suppose, because he doesn't feel like he has to take care of me or protect me. Um, my daughter, on the other hand, and like I still get phone calls from him because I do have a child with him, but he's she just doesn't, she wants very, very little to do with him. Um, and I just kind of, in the time that she's with him, let her experience just the type of person he is and let her make that decision. So and now with my current boyfriend, I mean, like I said, he is such the opposite, and we haven't had, outright argument or any kind of physical anything. We don't mentally abuse each other. And so that's an example for her. And I know Kelly said earlier, like, we're trying now to set that strong woman example, independent example for her future. And I just don't let her have to put up with any of that. If there's any kind of abuse from him, like, I mean, we're very, I feel like we're very strong now since that, and having my kids has helped a lot.
Thank you, Chrissy. So I saw what the marriage looked like with my mom and stepdad, and then I saw what my marriage looked like. So I knew I was going to be a good mom, but I wasn't a very good wife. And so I met somebody and I was like, hey, you don't have to have any responsibility. Let's have a baby and it'll be all good. And if you want to be in the life, you can be in the life. And it went on like that. And so I raised my baby, and eventually, I always knew where he was. And so when it was time and they met, I never bashed him. She got to go meet him. He's total narcissist. I barely knew him. He was just cute. And so she got to make her own opinion, just like Chrissy was saying. And so what that has done, we've always been very close. And I remember when she was 7, she said, I want to have a baby, but I don't want to be married. How do I go about that? And I was like, oh no, she thinks this is easy. So then I started talking about the importance of having a dad and all that good stuff. And so when she was in college, she said, I want to get married. I hope you're not disappointed. And I was like, what do you mean? She goes, I just want to be the first one in the family to do it right. And I was like, no, that's exactly what I want to happen for you. And so it's been a blessing. She's very strong and she's a very good wife and she's got a very good husband. And so, yeah, those relationships, again, you got to nurture them. You got to let that child know how important they are and communicate with them, and don't give them so much information because they're not an adult. And we got to really be careful as single moms. They're not an adult. They don't need to carry what we're carrying, and just be really conscientious of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. And then I will answer that, and that will be our last question for the evening. So I am very grateful for the love and the relationship that Nola has with her dad. After a really long struggle with kind of mutual respect and communication. It has been a pretty long battle. Nola, my daughter, is 11, and so she's a very loving kid. You know, I probably have told her more than I should have, but also she witnessed a lot on her own. So, you know, she typically had a lot of questions. And, you know, he was never physically abusive or aggressive toward her. I've seen him, you know, be manipulative, things like that, kind of gaslighting her, you know, just some stuff like that. I try to kind of prepare her. The only thing I really say to her is you cannot take these things personally, and you have to remember that it's not you. You know, because in those power and control relationships where the person doesn't, especially when they don't see themselves as an abusive person or a toxic person or any of those things, you know, I don't even know that they realize that they're doing stuff like that, but they put things on those kids, right? And so I do try to coach her in the respect of, you know, you'll be okay if you just remember that, you know, it's not, you're the kid, it's not your responsibility. Other adults' emotions are not a kid's responsibilities, you know. And so I say things like that to her, and they do have a good relationship when he's able to get out of his own way, right? I don't feel afraid for her to be around him, to go places with him, to spend time with him. And that I'm fortunate in that way, right? That's not everybody's situation. So I am grateful that she does have that relationship with her dad. I also think it's really important for her to experience positive male role models, right? So my dad is a really great positive male role model. I've mentioned this before. Chrissy and I we're very close. During the pandemic, we were she's part of my quarantine, right? We spent all this time together, and so, you know, Nola got to experience Isaac, and he is such an amazing guy. And watching Chrissy be in this super healthy relationship with him has honestly been a real joy for me, because I needed to know that was, sometimes I forget. But there's, you know, and I can mention other examples. There are other male role models in our lives, that Nola's been fortunate enough to be very, very close to and experience. And so I'm really grateful for all of that. I also like to try to remember that, you know, it's the majority of men are not abusive. That's not the situation. It's actually a minority of men. The problem is they are habitually abusive, right? It doesn't just go away. So, you know, they're abusing woman after woman after woman, right? And that's why there's so many of us, because there are men who are habitually abusive, but it is not the majority. You know, if even if when I look at my everyday life of the men in my life and around my life, whether I'm going to, you know, my church home or some of the other organizations I'm involved with, that's not my experience of the men that I see, right? The majority of the men that I know are these great human beings. And so I think that we need to remember that too, is that, you know, I think this is a hot button issue for a lot of people, because it's like, oh, you know, men, but it's not, you know. And I think that we have trust issues, right? Chrissy talked about that earlier too. Issues kind of relearning how to trust, but we're not just learning how to relearning how to trust men. We're relearning how to trust ourselves. We're relearning how to remember that we know how to make good decisions, that we're okay, that we can make any decisions, that we have good taste in friends, that we have good taste in people, that we're capable. We have to relearn all kinds of stuff. And, you know, the PTSD associated with some of this stuff is significant. And we have to relearn how to navigate the world after that as well. So that's kind of my final thoughts on the whole conversation is that most men are not domestic abusers, right? And that I do want people to remember that people who have been through a trauma that is this significant really do have a change in their brain chemistry. And it really does take some time to come back and recover from that. And like Carol was saying, getting help and seeing a counselor, or, you know, even having a friendship circle of other women, that was hugely useful to me. Just talking about other women and reminding each other that we're not crazy, right? Has been super, super helpful. And so what are y'all's final thoughts for the evening before we wrap this up? And then Carol, I would love for you to also either show us your book, or, you know, perfect. If you could get, yeah, a little closer maybe. Look, you're right on the, I like your, nope, back.
Oh my gosh, why won't it work?
I don't know.
I don't know. Let me see if I can figure out how to unblur myself.
Oh, that's why, because you've got some special effects on.
Okay.
So if you, there, finally
free. Let fear take you to your next adventure.
Perfect. And I think
Okay,
it's out at Book People right now too, right?
Yeah, we've got it at Book People in Austin. You can get it at Barnes and Noble. You can get it if you want a signed copy, then because I'm so important, then you can get out my website. It's finallyfreebook.com, and Amazon, of course. And yeah, if you're local, just hit me up and we can meet for coffee and talk more.
Nice. How about you, Chrissy? What are your final thoughts?
Just thank you for inviting me to be a panelist. And I didn't realize I was going to know so many answers to the questions.
That's the test you don't want to pass.
Just because most of the stuff that I went through, I feel like was more mental than physical. I mean, there's plenty of physical in there, but yeah, like you said, most of the men I know, most of them are not abusive. They're great role models, and they take care of the people around them. And in our circle, like the guys in our circle really step up and are a role model for our kids. So it's just like, and finding a group of women helps so much. I mean, I have a really close group, a few different groups of really close women that I can talk to about anything, and they can kind of see things that I can't necessarily see, and I trust them. So yeah, I'm just so grateful that I was able to talk about this.
Thank you. So I just want to plug a couple of things. So there's Safe Place in Austin, the Hayes Caldwell Women's Center in Hayes, it's kind of Hayes and Caldwell County. And then in Williamson County, we have, oh my gosh, why can't I remember the name of it? There's also a women's center in Williamson County, and for whatever reason, my brain is spacing. But if you were to kind of Google search Williamson County and women's center, it would pop right up. The Caring Place is something else. All right, so let's see. There's something in the chat. Chuck might have been able to find it and like helped me out. Oh no. I see the GTX Connect site, some thank yous from some of the people attending tonight. Carol got her book up there. And then, yeah, so.
I do want to also thank everybody that showed up tonight and listened to us go on.
Listen to
that's
us
amazing.
go on.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, let's keep this thing going. This is so fun.
Yeah, we kind of hope that it does keep going.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the.
What's the next topic for next month?
Next month, I believe, is
the men who survived us.
Right. No, it's is it book burning? We were,
yeah.
Which one is it?
It's about book burning, book banning.
Book burning, book banning.
Ooh,
Nice.
don't burn this one.
Yeah. The Hope Alliance. It finally came to me. Did you see my whole face?
Good
Like,
job.
it's called Hope Alliance. Now, and keep in mind that just because something has the word women or women's center or anything like that, they do help men also. I just want people to be clear on that, especially, you know, if you know someone who is a male and is in a domestic violence situation and is ashamed or afraid or doesn't think there's help for them, there is help for them. So Hope Alliance was the one in Williamson County. And with that, thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you to my lovely panelists, and have a good evening.
Okay, bye everybody. Oh, there's your little mini me.
Yeah, usually